Dance this waltz and I'll wed my son to you, William Thompson III declared with a sneer loud enough to reach every corner of Manhattan's high society gathering, his champagne flute aimed at the black woman who had just stumbled and sent a crystal serving tray crashing onto the ballroom's marble flooring. The thunderous crash of breaking glass brought an immediate hush over the 200 attendees at the grand opening celebration for Thompson Holdings' newest tower. Every gaze shifted to Keisha Williams, 35 years old, who had been employed as a contracted cleaning service worker at this gala for merely 3 weeks. "Father, you're being absurd," whispered Jonathan Thompson, 28, mortified by his millionaire parents' heartless mockery. However, William paid no mind to his son's objection, clearly intoxicated by both authority and the $1,000 whiskey he'd been consuming throughout the evening. No, allow me to continue," William pressed on, striding to the room's center as though he were presiding over a courtroom. "This individual clearly lacks the coordination necessary for proper cleaning. Why don't we test whether she can even maintain rhythm?" Keisha stayed on her knees, gathering the crystal fragments with shaking hands, yet her eyes held something none of those present could interpret. It wasn't shame or terror. It was a profound tranquility, as though she were analyzing every word, every heartless chuckle, every disdainful stare directed her way. "Mr. Thompson," the event coordinator interjected quietly, "perhaps it might be preferable—" "Preferable? Nothing," William interrupted him, gesturing theatrically. "Start a waltz. If she can dance superior to my spouse, I'll wed my son to her immediately. Picture it, the Thompson Empire's heir wedding the custodial worker." Collective amusement rippled through the hall like a surge of shared cruelty. Several ladies pressed hands to their lips, feigning shock while clearly relishing the entertainment. The gentlemen shook their heads as if observing a perfectly reasonable display of poor taste. Keisha finally rose, cleaned her hands on her work apron, and met William Thompson's gaze directly. For a moment that felt infinite. She remained quiet, as if reaching a decision that would alter not merely this evening, but the entire hierarchy of power within this space. "I agree," she stated in a crisp voice that sliced through the atmosphere like a razor. The hall became completely quiet. Even the musicians ceased playing, bewildered by the unexpected direction events had taken. William blinked repeatedly, convinced he'd misheard. "What did you say?" he demanded, his arrogance momentarily disturbed by her unforeseen reply. "I said I agree to your challenge," Keisha restated, now wearing a slight smile that sent an unexplainable chill through several guests' spines. "However, when I dance superior to your spouse, you'll honor your promise, even though it was spoken in jest." At this moment, while everyone mocked and laughed even harder, believing they were observing the decade's greatest humiliation, nobody noticed the recognizable sparkle in Keisha's eyes, the identical sparkle that had once captivated audiences on some of the globe's most distinguished stages, before one tragic evening completely altered her life's trajectory. If this tale of bias and unexpected developments has captured your interest, remember to subscribe to the channel, because what's about to unfold in this ballroom will demonstrate that undervaluing someone can be the costliest error a person ever commits. William's spouse, Victoria Thompson, a 50-year-old woman renowned for her ballroom dancing instruction to Manhattan's elite, approached wearing a malicious smile. "Darling, do you truly believe I must lower myself to compete with this?" she remarked, dismissively gesturing toward Keisha. "Don't be humble, Victoria," William responded, clearly savoring the circumstances. "You captured that Club Waltz championship last year. That should suffice for this exhibition." Keisha observed silently, but her thoughts traveled back 15 years, when she was recognized as Keisha Morrow, lead dancer with the American National Ballet. She recalled evenings when complete audiences stood in ovation, reviews comparing her to history's greatest ballerinas, the sensation of soaring across the world's most prestigious stages. Everything had concluded on one devastating night. A special performance for political elites, an automobile accident returning home, 3 months unconscious, and a harsh awakening to reality. Her legs would never function the same again. The physician said she'd be fortunate to walk normally again. Professional dancing? Unthinkable. "Jonathan," William called, turning to his son, "retrieve your camera. I want this moment recorded for history. the day a cleaning woman attempted to masquerade as a dancer at my event. Jonathan wavered, visibly uncomfortable. Father, this has exceeded reasonable bounds. She was simply performing her duties. The girl, William interrupted sarcastically, accepted the challenge. Now she'll provide entertainment. Or would you prefer I inform your girlfriend about that embarrassing incident last week? Jonathan's complexion paled. Keisha realized blackmail was involved, another demonstration of the toxic dominance William wielded over everyone surrounding him. Start the music, William commanded the DJ, and place your wagers. $500 for those betting on my wife's victory, $1,000 for those brave enough to wager on the employee. Cruel laughter resonated through the space. Some attendees actually began placing bets, treating the situation as complimentary entertainment. Victoria positioned herself at the dance floor's center, performing several dramatic stretches to showcase her experience. You know what? William said, approaching Keisha with a malicious grin. When you fail, and you will fail, I want you kneeling and apologizing for wasting everyone's time. Then naturally, you're terminated. It was then that something shifted in Keisha's eyes, the same resolve that had propelled her to perform on international stages, the same strength that enabled her to endure months of physical rehabilitation just to walk again, the same dignity that sustained her when she lost everything she'd worked toward her entire life. Mr. Thompson, she said with a composure that sent an inexplicable chill down some attendees' spines, when I win, and I will win, I want you to honor your marriage promise, but I also want something additional. William raised his eyebrows, amused by her boldness. Oh, she wants to make demands now. Very well, entertain me. What else do you desire besides marrying my son? I want you to acknowledge, before all these guests, that you misjudged a woman based solely on her skin color and occupation. And I want a public apology. The room tensed. Several guests whispered among themselves, recognizing the situation had taken a more serious turn than anticipated. William laughed boisterously. You possess courage. I'll acknowledge that. Fine, I agree. But when you embarrass yourself, you'll depart here not only unemployed but with no dignity remaining. What William Thompson III didn't realize was that he was about to confront not merely a cleaning lady with a mysterious history, but a woman who had lost everything once and understood exactly how difficult it was to fight for every fragment of respect in a society that had rejected her. While Victoria prepared with basic ballroom movements across the dance floor, a silent tempest was forming, because there exists a brutal difference between someone who learned dancing as a pastime and someone born to make dance a universal language, even when fate attempted to steal it from her forever. While Victoria warmed up with elementary ballroom steps, Keisha stood motionless in the dance floor's corner, but her mind operated like a precision instrument. 15 years of harsh physical therapy, learning to walk again, accepting she would never be identical, had forged within her a resilience none of those pampered wealthy children could comprehend. Observe her, one guest whispered to her companion. She's probably never set foot on a dance floor in her existence. What needless degradation. William Thompson circulated the room like a satisfied predator, collecting wagers from guests and deliberately amplifying the humiliation. $500 says she cannot complete the song without stumbling, he announced, raising his champagne glass. $1,000 for anyone betting she'll flee mid-performance. Laughter echoed throughout the space, but Keisha noticed something William missed. His son Jonathan wasn't laughing. Actually, the young man appeared increasingly troubled by the entire situation, shifting restlessly near the wall and avoiding the crowd's attention. It was then she noticed something familiar about Jonathan's features. This wasn't her first encounter with him. 3 weeks prior, when she began working Thompson Holdings events, she'd observed a young man who consistently treated contract workers respectfully, unlike other executives. It was him. Miss, came a low voice beside her. Keisha turned and saw a black man in his 60s, wearing the building security team's discreet uniform. I'm Marcus, security chief. I've worked here 20 years. He approached carefully, pretending to check his radio. I witnessed you dance before, he murmured so softly only she could hear. 15 years ago at the National Theatre. Keisha Morrow, principal soloist. I was security there too. Keisha's heart raced. Someone had recognized her. After years of concealing her identity, working anonymous jobs for survival, someone finally knew her true self. "I thought you perished in the accident," Marcus continued, his eyes revealing shock mixed with admiration. "The newspapers claimed you'd never dance again." "The newspapers claimed many things," Keisha replied, maintaining vocal steadiness. "Not everything was accurate." Marcus nodded slowly. "What they did to you was unjust. And what they're doing now," he glanced toward William, still laughing loudly, "is worse." At that moment, Keisha made a decision she'd postponed for 15 years, not just about dancing, but about her true identity and what she was willing to reveal to the world. "Marcus," she said, "I need assistance. After I dance, regardless of what happens, I need you to record everything that follows, especially the reactions." He looked confused, but nodded. "Certainly. But why?" "Because," Keisha smiled for the first time that evening, "some people need reminding that underestimating someone based on appearance can be life's most expensive mistake." Meanwhile, William had decided to make the spectacle even more cruel. "You know what?" he shouted to the entire room. "Let's make this more interesting. If she can complete the song without falling or stopping, I'll give her $1,000. But when she fails, and she will fail, I want her cleaning this entire room on her knees before all of us." The crowd reacted with mixed laughter and some uncomfortable murmurs. Several guests began realizing the situation had crossed lines, but nobody possessed courage to confront William Thompson III. "Father," Jonathan attempted once more, "this has gone too far." "Silence, Jonathan," William snapped. "You're too soft. That's precisely why you need to learn how the real world functions. There's a natural hierarchy, and people like her," he pointed at Keisha, "need to understand their position." It was then that Keisha began moving, not to position herself on the dance floor, but to stretch. The movements were subtle, almost imperceptible to most present, but Marcus recognized them immediately. They were the preparatory exercises she performed before every National Theatre performance. "My God," Marcus muttered to himself, "she's actually going to do this." Victoria Thompson, realizing attention was shifting toward Keisha, decided to begin her presentation. "Start the music," she ordered. "Let's conclude this charade." The DJ, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation, played a classical waltz. Victoria began dancing solo, executing competent but predictable ballroom movements. She'd learned to dance at elite clubs with expensive private instructors, but her technique was clearly amateur by professional standards. Still, she received polite applause from the audience. After all, to this audience, she represented everything they considered appropriate: wealthy, white, educated in the finest social circles. "Well done, dear," said William, applauding excessively. "Now it's time for our guest performer." Keisha slowly walked to the dance floor's center. Each step was measured, controlled, laden with dignity that began making some present uncomfortable. This wasn't how a defeated person was supposed to behave. "What song would you like?" asked the DJ, more from politeness than genuine consideration. "The same one," Keisha replied simply, "but from the beginning." William laughed. "Oh, she wants another opportunity. How delightful. Very well, play the song. Let's see how long she lasts before surrendering." What none of them knew was that Keisha had strategically chosen this song. It was a waltz she'd danced hundreds of times during her career. One of the pieces she knew by heart, flowing through her muscle memory like second nature. More importantly, it was one of her final performances before the accident. A night when she received a 5-minute standing ovation at the National Theatre in a performance critics had described as transcendent and one of the most emotionally devastating performances in American dance history. As she awaited the music's beginning, Keisha closed her eyes and allowed her memories to transport her back to that evening 15 years ago. She remembered the sensation of flying across the stage, the deep connection with each musical note, the absolute certainty that she'd been born for this. The doctors had said she'd never dance again. The media had speculated her career was definitively finished. She herself had believed it for years, until slowly, painfully, she began rebuilding not only her muscles, but her relationship with dance. She'd never returned to the stage. She'd never attempted to resume her career. But she'd never stopped dancing in secret. alone during her new life's most difficult moments. The music began, and with it, something extraordinary was about to occur in that hall filled with prejudice and arrogance. Under the weight of all those condescending glances, her hands positioned themselves with precision that made several musicians frown, instinctively recognizing they were about to witness something far beyond simple amateur dancing. But what none could have imagined was that those opening bars would mark not only a lost legend's rebirth, but the moment when this environment's entire power structure would be permanently shaken. The waltz's first bars echoed through the hall, and Keisha began moving. These weren't the hesitant steps everyone expected to see. Instead, she rose with grace that instantly changed the room's atmosphere, as if gravity had lost some power over her. Her initial movements were subtle, almost modest, allowing the audience to maintain low expectations. But as the music gained momentum, something extraordinary began happening. Each step became more fluid, each turn more precise, each movement charged with deep emotion that began mesmerizing everyone present. William Thompson stopped laughing. Victoria stopped smiling. The entire room began realizing they weren't watching a cleaning lady attempting to dance. They were witnessing an artist reclaiming her place in the world. My God. Someone in the audience murmured, She's exceptional." Keisha performed a sequence of pirouettes that would challenge any professional ballerina, followed by a grand jeté that lifted her airborne with lightness defying physics. These weren't ballroom dance moves. This was classical ballet of the highest order, masterfully adapted to the waltz. Marcus, keeping his promise to Keisha, had discreetly positioned his cell phone to record not only the performance, but the audience's reactions, especially William Thompson's reactions, whose face had transformed from scorn to confusion, then to something approaching terror. "This is impossible," William whispered to himself, his voice catching. "Who the hell is this woman?" It was when Keisha performed the final sequence from her old National Theatre performance, a combination of movements that had been her trademark, a unique fusion of classical techniques she'd created herself, that truth began striking some present like lightning. "Wait a minute," said a woman in the audience, an arts patron who attended every major cultural event in the city. "I recognize those moves. I've seen that sequence before. But where?" Jonathan Thompson was completely mesmerized, his camera capturing every second of the performance. Unlike his father, he recognized genius when he saw it, regardless of who displayed it. When the music reached its climax, Keisha performed a series of fouettes, continuous turns on one leg that left the entire audience speechless. These movements required not only perfect technique, but years of training and extraordinary physical strength. The music concluded, and Keisha finished in a pose that was simultaneously powerful and vulnerable. Her arms extended, her head held high with absolute dignity, her breathing controlled despite the performance's intensity. The silence that followed lasted eternally. It was the kind of silence that occurs when an audience witnesses something transcending their wildest expectations. Then slowly one person began applauding, then another. Within seconds the entire hall was standing, applauding with intensity that made the windows rattle. "Bravo!" someone shouted. "Extraordinary!" echoed another. William Thompson was pale as a ghost, realizing he'd just been completely humiliated by someone he considered inferior. Worse, he'd done so before Manhattan's elite, who now regarded him with disapproval mixed with embarrassment. It was then that Marcus approached Keisha, still recording. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "allow me to introduce Keisha Morrow, former principal soloist with the American National Ballet." The name echoed through the hall like an explosion. Several people gasped, others exclaimed in shock. Keisha Morrow was a legend, a ballerina who had mysteriously disappeared at her career's height after a tragic accident. "Impossible," Victoria Thompson stammered. "Keisha Morrow is dead, or at least she never danced again after the accident." "Clearly," said Keisha, finally breaking her silence, "reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated." The crowd laughed, but William Thompson found nothing amusing. The reality of what had occurred began hitting him like a freight train. He had publicly humiliated one of American history's greatest performers, and worse, he'd done so on recording. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus said, still holding the cell phone. "You stated that if she danced better than your wife, you would marry her to your son. I believe this entire audience can testify that the condition has been more than satisfied." Jonathan, realizing where the situation was heading, approached Keisha. "Miss Morrow," he said, "I would like to publicly apologize for my father's behavior. It was inexcusable." "Jonathan, be quiet," exploded William, his control mask finally slipping completely. "You will not apologize to anyone, especially not to her." It was then that Keisha revealed her plan's true extent. "Mr. Thompson," she said calmly, "I believe we have a marriage proposal to discuss. After all, a man of your position surely keeps his word, doesn't he?" The audience fell silent, realizing they were witnessing something much greater than a simple talent display. "You must be insane if you think I'll honor a drunken joke," William growled, his arrogance returning as desperation. "But it wasn't a joke," Keisha said, smiling. "Marcus, could you replay the recording of Mr. Thompson's statements from tonight?" Marcus held his cell phone high enough for everyone to hear as he played back the clear recording of William, making the bet, doubling the conditions, increasing the humiliations, and publicly declaring he would marry his son to her if she won the challenge. "And here he is confirming the terms," the recording continued. "Even after I specified, he would have to keep his word." The audience murmured, some laughing nervously, others clearly embarrassed by the situation William had created for himself. "That's blackmail," William shouted, completely losing his composure. "No," Keisha corrected calmly, "this is accountability. You made a public wager, with clear terms, before 200 witnesses. Now you must decide if you are a man of your word or if your reputation is worth less than your prejudice." Jonathan moved closer to Keisha. "Miss Morrow," he said, "if you'll permit me, I would like to honor my father's word. Not because I'm forced to, but because any man would be honored to marry someone of your talent and dignity." The audience murmured, surprised by the unexpected romantic turn. William was now visibly trembling with rage. "Jonathan, if you do this, you're out of the company, out of the family, out of everything." "Then so be it," Jonathan replied, extending his hand to Keisha. "Some things are more important than money, Father, like having integrity." Keisha looked at the outstretched hand, then at the audience, then at William Thompson, who was clearly experiencing what appeared to be a public nervous breakdown. "Mr. Thompson," she said, 15 years ago, people like you decided I had no value after I became imperfect. Tonight you attempted to humiliate me based on my skin color and the work I do to survive. But you know what I've discovered? True nobility doesn't come from inheritance or bank accounts. It comes from how we treat other human beings when we think nobody is watching." She turned to Jonathan. "Your son seems to have learned that lesson, despite your best efforts. As for the proposal," she smiled, "I'll accept dinner with him. But marriage, well, that's something two people decide together based on love and respect, not humiliating wagers." The audience erupted in applause again, but this time it wasn't just for the dance. It was approval for the dignity and wisdom Keisha had shown. William Thompson, realizing he had lost not only the bet, but the respect of everyone present, including his own son, muttered something about leaving it to the lawyers and departed the hall, followed by Victoria, who was clearly mortified by the entire situation. Marcus stopped recording and approached Keisha. "This is going to be very interesting when it hits social media," he said with a smile. And as Manhattan's elite continued processing what they'd just witnessed, a lesson in prejudice, humility, and the difference between social class and true class, one question remained in the air. How would William Thompson, a man who built his empire on his reputation, deal with the fact that his arrogance and prejudice had been exposed in the most public and humiliating way possible, and that this exposure was about to spread far beyond that ballroom? Marcus's recording spread across social media like wildfire. In less than 24 hours, Millionaire humiliates legendary ballerina had become a worldwide trending topic, accumulating millions of views and outraged comments. William Thompson III woke the next day to discover his company had lost $3 million in contracts overnight. His partners were demanding an emergency meeting, and his wife Victoria had locked herself in their bedroom, refusing to appear publicly. "Father, Jonathan said when he found his father in his office, surrounded by newspapers with devastating headlines. The board has voted. You have 1 hour to resign, or you'll be removed by force. William looked at his son, seeing for the first time not submission but determination. You did this, he murmured. You betrayed me. No, Jonathan replied calmly. You betrayed yourself the moment you decided your arrogance was worth more than your humanity. Meanwhile, Keisha was being bombarded with offers. 3 international ballet companies wanted her to choreograph special performances. Lincoln Center had called offering a solo event. Hollywood producers were interested in turning her story into a movie. But the offer that touched her most came from an unexpected source. The children at the community school where she'd taught dance before working for Thompson Holdings. They had pooled their savings, $23 in total, to offer her a scholarship to return to teaching. I'll take it, Keisha said tearfully, but on one condition, let's turn this into something bigger. 6 months later, the Keisha Morrow Center for the Arts opened in Manhattan's heart, funded by donations that poured in from around the world after her story went viral. Jonathan Thompson, now running a completely revamped version of the family business focused on social responsibility, was the first major donor. William Thompson, meanwhile, had lost everything: his company, his reputation, his family. Victoria had filed for divorce and moved to Europe. He was last seen working as a low-level consultant at a small firm, a shadow of the arrogant man who once believed money gave him the right to humiliate other human beings. You know what impresses me most about this entire story? Marcus said during the center's opening, watching Keisha teach a class of diverse, smiling children. It wasn't just a victory over prejudice, it was a lesson in how true nobility responds to cruelty. Keisha, now recognized once again as one of her generation's greatest artists, smiled as she watched her new students perform their first ballet steps. Sometimes, she said, we have to lose everything to discover who we really are. And sometimes people have to lose everything to learn who they should never have tried to be. Jonathan approached, carrying flowers from the garden he'd planted around the center himself. Ready for dinner? He asked, offering his arm to Keisha. Ready, she replied, accepting not only his arm but the new life she'd built on the ashes of her old one. Keisha's true revenge wasn't destroying William Thompson. It was building something so beautiful and inspiring that his cruelty seemed insignificant in comparison. She proved that when we face prejudice with dignity and respond to hatred with excellence, we don't just win, we transform the world around us. What about you? Have you ever faced someone who tried to diminish your dreams based on prejudice? Tell us your story in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove the best response to those who underestimate us is simply to be extraordinary.